Welcome back to part 2 of our delicious conversation with Keren Eldad. She is an executive coach for people who are already very successful but want to feel successful on the inside as they look on the outside. As I said, I don't really have coaches on the show for reasons that we discussed a lot in part 1 of the show. And if you didn't catch part 1 of the show, I happily encourage you to go back. It is a fascinating conversation that will have you question this constant pursuit of success. I like success just as much as you do, but what are you leaving behind in this pursuit of success? What is getting left behind when it comes to fulfilling you rather than just giving you the success? We talked a lot about that in part 1, and we also talked about how there is these levels of resistance that come at different points in time and what has to happen in those. It's definitely not for the faint-hearted, and I want to be clear about that. I really do believe it is the journey we're talking about is the heroic journey. However, here in part 2 of the show, I want to talk with you, Keren, about this piece of, let's suggest that somebody's been listening to part 1 of this show, they can see themselves in what we've talked about. They've got the big house, they've got the big car, they've got the accolades, the fame, fortune, power, whatever it may be. They secretly know something is missing. So they maybe have no interest in religion, or maybe they've pursued religion and it's not that for them. They maybe have even been to a therapist and found out that was kind of passive, or I've had a coach and it's kind of passive and it's put them off. Nonetheless, they have listened to this show and gone, yeah, they're really talking about me. What is the practical steps that someone can take to help themselves who maybe potentially doesn't feel, even though they might be wrong, that they are ready for you or for me, or that they could afford to work with either of us? As I said, they may be wrong about that, but what would you give them as practical steps?
So when the student is ready, the teacher appears, right? You and I have both experienced this because we've been in the inner work circle for quite some time. But many times the reason the work doesn't catch is actually because we're not ready to hear. And we're certainly not ready to implement, which means we're not ready to face the losses that will be involved in our ascension. And make no mistake, anytime you ask for a higher level, you will be letting a different level go. If you are indeed ready, I always recommend that people examine 5 steps, and they will not be able to do them co-curricularly. They have to go through one step at a time.
Okay.
That will make this transition possible. The first is to let go of the illusion, or to admit that they actually have a problem, to admit that they're actually not living in a giant fairy tale that looks amazing on Instagram, and that their life is in fact kind of shitty. And I don't mean that your life actually sucks. I just mean it is not happy. Anything that is less than happy, for the record, which means less than waking up eager and eagerness for more, is unhappiness. And for that, I always say, just check yourself against these 10 hallmarks. The first is stagnation or overwhelm. The second is jealousy. The third is your physical changes are really bothering you. The fourth is regret about time that has gone by. The fifth is a dissatisfaction about where you are versus where you should be. The more aggressive forms are purposeless or aimlessness. There's also boredom, or is this all there is? And of course, there's the fear of starting over. Now, there are lots of other little tiny varietals of this, but if anybody sees themselves in these, the first thing to do is shatter the illusion that everything is okay, because it's not. And if you are willing to shatter the illusion that everything is okay, you will enter a form of grief. You will automatically enter a moment that is emotionally difficult. Now, I love that you brought up the heroic journey as a term, first, because it's one of the things I love about the themes of your newsletter, but it's also because it allows me to bring up Joseph Campbell.
Of course.
The cave you fear is holding the treasure you seek. That's when you're going to enter the cave. To enter the cave means one thing. It means that you enter step 2, which is drop people-pleasing. And to drop people-pleasing, I honestly believe, is about stop lying. To stop lying to measure up, stop lying to line up, stop lying about how cool everything is. Literally start to externalize this process by facing the world with a new level of vulnerability, with a lot less embellishment and varnish.
Yes. Very good.
If you can do that, you'll meet the third step, which is stop settling for crumbs. I always say, why have good when you can have fabulous?
Mm-hmm.
Why would you settle for just, I'm blessed, when you can literally have a great life, a really great relationship, not one, but two cats, tremendous emotional growth.
Right.
This is when we can start facing the next level, and that is overcoming the guilt about wanting more. We can actually start feeling even audacity and excitement to have more. Those people who tell me, just like they tell you, I already have so much, are actually feeling a terrible guilt or association that is not positive with acquiring more or asking for more. And you blast past that. You stop thinking 2x, you start thinking 10x because you're fully in abundance. And then finally, you will rise. The last stage is the process of ascension, which is much more relaxed than you think it is. And it allows you this time to take everybody with you because it's a much more generous ascent. It's less lonely, less Machiavellian, less guarded ascent than ever before. Those are the 5 steps. And I say that the most practical ones that you can do yourself are number 1 and number 2.
So if a person does number 1 and number 2, where do you see them getting to? Now, by the way, if you don't get what number 1 and number 2 is, you can go to the transcript. It's there. Or you can just play it back a little bit and write them down and ask yourself those questions. But now go to that, please.
They're going to have 2 things in their hand. Number 1, they will see clearly the delta between where they are and where they want to be, which is effectively a roadmap.
Mm-hmm.
They will see the difference in if they mapped out their life as they actually would like it to be rather than what is right now. And the second thing they'll get is an opportunity to be honest. An opportunity to be honest is the end of suffering. It sucks because we have to even be honest about where we've been dishonest. And we've all been dishonest, a lot. But it starts to really set you free. You'll already feel better.
And this is really important because one of the things I've written about in some of my newsletters is that we as a society are a bunch of liars. And we lie socially when we say things like, how are you? It's fine. F-I-N-E. Effed up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. When I first moved to North America, I was always fascinated by these little yellow smiley faces. And then I realized those are the masks of North Americans. In the UK, people just say, I'm miserable. They would just tell you the truth. How you doing? I'm miserable. They would far less tell you when they were having a good time, which was also a problem. But on this side, it was, I'm great when they were actually not so great. And peeling off that happy face and telling the truth is so vitally important, but we're so afraid of offending by telling the truth, as opposed to saying what I really want is real relationships, not relationships based on my lies of how are you, I'm great, how are you, I'm great, and now let's talk about how wonderful our lives are and skirt around everything that actually really matters. And one of the ways to sort of plug into what Karen was just saying is ask yourself this question. How many people in your life, in your relationships, can you tell the truth to? How many people can you say when you're in the shit and it all looks fantastic that you're in the shit? Not that it doesn't look fantastic, it looks fantastic. But you can say, you know what? I got this, I got that, I got the other thing. But just, oh my God, I'm feeling down, I'm feeling depressed, I'm feeling overwhelmed. And by the way, in fairness to you, I just want you to get this. In fairness to you as you watch and listen to us, we are in a global emotional recession. Now, you know what that means in economics? The money would pull back. Well, the emotions have pulled back. In a post-COVID world, we have pulled back. And people are self-protective. And they're feeling the loneliness and they're feeling the lack of community. And the only way out of it is for us to admit that and tell the truth so that we can be there for each other and teach AI what it's like to be human and teach each other what it's like to be human as opposed to being an Instagram version of ourselves. So I really want you to grasp that. So Karen, let's talk about this at a bigger level. Let's talk about this first at a corporate level, because you and I do a lot of work with our organizations who are certainly not willing to burn it all down. They're certainly not willing to say, well, I'm just going to let it all go. So how do we bring this message to organizations?
Well, you talk, especially in Fiercely Loyal, about the millennial engagement problem and how we can through servant leadership and the cultivation of leadership that truly acknowledges first and foremost the self and then the other, bring everyone to a different level of consciousness. That is also the solution that I have found to be the only one that is not only practical, but tenable. And that is self-awareness. In other words, the focus on the individual, actually understanding themselves and learning how to appreciate and be compassionate towards themselves. Once they can do that, they can develop both vulnerability and empathy, and therefore they can start to lead from a place that is far more authentic. This sounds like something that is almost instantaneous, and it's not. This is deep work. It requires deep work. It requires confronting the ways in which we are not self-aware, the ways in which we are behaving in a way that is calculated and facade-oriented, and also the willingness to strip all of that down, all the Instagram yumminess away. And once we can do that, we actually are in a position to lead completely differently. There's no reason to scrap everything. There's no reason to start from scratch. You do, however, need to do an inside job to remove all of the barriers so that you can lead in a completely different way. And you can do this in a group, you can do this in person. But if you don't get people to start telling the truth about who they are and start telling the truth to each other, they will actually never get to a place where there is a team truth or a real orientation in the same.
And so what would be the practical step for a leader to engage her people in that process?
To first and foremost challenge the illusions that they're operating under. They're all operating under illusions, right? Things are okay. Everybody likes me. Everybody likes each other. We're actually doing great. This is a great place. Everything is awesome. No, it isn't. And your problems are very likely to also not be 100% on target either.
Right.
And until you're willing to truly look at things properly and let go of these illusions, face what needs to be faced, you're actually going to continue to build toxicity. You and I were talking before about something really interesting that you said, Dov, was it'll only take 11% of humanity to elevate this consciousness out of global emotional recession. I love that it spells out and into a new state of consciousness, which, by the way, I believe is why there is a recession. I actually think it's pulling back in order to pull forward in a bigger way. There's only one way to do that, and that's to face the truth and face the absolute truth of where you stand. Unfortunately, most of us cannot do this alone, and that's where coaches and trainers come in. Usually because we're outside the jar, we can see what's going on. You're inside a jar. It's all blurry in there. You've been in the muck for too long. You usually have absolutely no clue about what's really, really going on. And this is where the mental arrogance has to dissipate. You think that everything's going right, but if it's not, and you have serious churn, serious turnover, toxicity within the organization, and of course, flawed results, less than great results, you should probably talk to somebody who's not inside your organization. They're very likely to see things a little bit more clearly than you can. And that's the first thing that I would do. Of course, the second thing would be, after we get all of this clear, to build a container through which we can actually start telling the truth, or at least delivering more concise, clear feedback and expectation. And when we're in that zone, we can really start to move.
So what would you call that kind of leader?
I like the term servant leader very much, personally.
Yeah.
Because it's a leader that's not oriented towards the self, but truly with the heart of service. And I also like compassionate leaders.
Right. So it's very interesting, and for me, it's part of my long journey, is that I'm always keenly aware that the polarity is showing me the other side. So we're living in a world right now with authoritarian leaders. We had Bolsonaro in Brazil. I'm sorry, I'm having some neurological flatulence. I can't remember his name. But the guy who was the leader of the Philippines, he's not anymore.
Duterte.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much. And now we've got another Marcos in there. Unbelievable. Then you've got the leader of Hungary. You've got the leader of Turkey. We've got this authoritarian leadership, even in Israel.
That's right.
And we've also got the rising tides of not only authoritarianism, but war. We're seeing two wars two very serious wars going on in the world today, and people are pulled in all kinds of directions. I would really love to hear your thoughts on insight on this polarity that we're seeing, that you and I, we'd like to maybe think that we're fighting the good fight and we're doing the crusade of let's bring up leadership in a servant leadership way that is deeply compassionate and caring and loving. And at the same time, people are saying, yeah, but we're living with this, and this is rising up. What's your thoughts on it?
It's exactly why I do the work that I do. I believe that people, especially my focus on the upper crust, if you will, people with very, very big influence live very, very big wakes, which goes, of course, with the size of their influence. They're the ones whose consciousness needs to be elevated as high as possible, or to find counterbalance to the forces who now have too much power. And Netanyahu is an exceptional example of this. A real Machiavellian thinker who truly believes that he has somehow inherited the right of God to protect Israel, which is a very difficult mindset from which to not see the present situation as a revenge crusade.
Mm-hmm.
As Yuval Noah Harari, the great Israeli thinker, has said recently many, many times in interviews, if you have an option to choose between revenge or justice and peace, choose peace.
Yes.
There's only one way to start choosing peace more concretely, and it is to work on your mindset to the point where you have completed all 5 of the steps that you and I discussed today, and you are finally at acceptance. You're just not out for blood anymore. You really aren't. And that is so hard for people to do, especially if they are living in the world of fear and of doubt. They can't even accept this as a viable possibility, but it is a viable possibility. I've seen it many times in negotiations. I've seen it many times with people who have enormous power. When they actually choose to put the weapons down and have a constructive dialogue, they find a long-lasting, not compromised, but really long-lasting, sustainable rather than destruction. And the more we can do this, I think, on a private or individual basis, the more we can ultimately impact larger and larger numbers of people who operate around these people. And as for this moment, I think we're going to just have to write it out. I do want to offer to anyone who's thinking about these in a macro perspective that there are enormous forces or counter forces rising up against these people. Mm-hmm. So it's yet to be seen how much longer their influence will.
Yeah, we saw Trump in America. The thing about it is that I think that everybody forgets is that even the bad guys get some things right. And it's really important. If we go approaching these things with everything they do is wrong, then you end up pushing away people who would come to the middle. And people will say to me, well, how can you say these things? I said, listen, I can find many things that Donald Trump's presidency was good for. I can
Absolutely.
do that. He talked about building a wall. I was not in favor of a wall. And at the same time, Biden has said we need to build a wall.
I mean, the Abraham Accords are another great example. But what you're saying here is really also the antithesis of the fearful or doubtful thinking. Fearful or doubtful thinking is binary thinking.
Exactly.
I can only address one extreme or another. Enlightened thinking or more practiced thinking can hold 3 ideas at the same time. And they do not have to blow your brain. They actually can live together. In the case of Israel, everybody can maybe learn to hold 3 different ideas in their heads. There was a horrific attack. Israel has done some pretty bad things. And hopefully there might be a third way forward. There can be a recognition of both peoples for self-determination. If we can't wrap our heads around all of these things, we have to categorize ourselves, and we automatically put ourselves in a position not only to alienate the center, but to lose the war.
Yeah, and that war is not what's going on in the Middle East. It's the war within ourselves and the war within each other, because I am not condemning Trump voters no more than I'm condemning Israelis or I'm condemning Palestinians. What I condemn is the lunacy that creates these things. I have nothing against Russian people. I'm not a fan of Vladimir Putin. Does that make me anti-Russian? No, of course not. That's ludicrous. Nobody would say that. But this is a lot of things that we're seeing in the world. And that's what we've seen across the dinner table in our own families and in our own communities. We're not looking for what we have in common. In your big dream, what do you want? Not to take out those people and remove those people, but what is it you want that matters? And again, we're back to what you've been talking about all the way through, Keren, which is you've accumulated all this stuff but have you ever stopped to ask, what do you actually want? And you have this whole piece around checking your worldview. I think it's important for us, before we finish, for you to go into that so people can really have a grasp on it.
Well, the only thing that causes this severe separation from self, separation from the desire for joy and meaning, which is what all of our souls ultimately want. Our souls want harmony and upliftment, is the embracing of a Machiavellian worldview. There are only two worldviews. Most of your listeners, I'm sure, will be familiar with scarcity versus abundance as a mindset framework. The scarcity framework is the idea that the world's resources are finite and we are all competing for them. It's a dog-eat-dog world. And the abundance mindset, in stark contrast, says that resources are not limited. They're forever replenishing. For example, the internet appeared in the middle of my lifetime. It didn't exist when I was a kid. And as a result of that, we are not carving a finite pie. We are in an ever-expanding pie. There is plenty for all. Now, one allows you to really collaborate with others and exercise the nature of your soul, which is to uplift and to find harmony and to find peace. And the other has you constantly looking around for sharks. I always say to people in the beginning, when they really, really want to argue for the Machiavellian worldview, you could be right or you can be happy, and you can have that, but what have you got to lose? Just assume in a few dimensions of your life that there actually is the possibility of abundance, that you are not taking anything from anybody and they're not taking anything away from you, and watch what happens. The way that we perceive the world is what will create what we see. And if we are to change our lives from one that is chasing the trappings of success into one that accepts the bounty of meaning and joy that's available to us, the worldview is what ultimately has to change.
And I think it's important for each of us to take a step into really honestly asking yourself, what is my worldview? And not the worldview that is a sticker, meaning, oh, I have an abundant mentality, or, oh, I love everybody. Not some bumper sticker nonsense, but to really take a look at how, and here's the test for me anyway, at least. Under stress, we regress.
Exactly.
Psychological truth. Under stress, we regress. Where do you go to in stress? Do you go into self-protection? Do you put on the armor and buy the guns, even if those are psychological guns and psychological armor? Or do you say, I'm really stressed, I'm really feeling lost, I need to reach out, that there are people I can serve, and there are people who can serve me. And I think that oftentimes when we're in that Machiavellian, is that if I show any area of weakness, they will take me down. I know I lived there for the first 25, 28 years of my life. I grew up in that environment. I learned that environment. I grew up in an emotional, psychological war zone, and I had to develop that. It wasn't bad. It was absolutely appropriate for that environment, but it was shit for the rest of my life, and it never allowed anything that was joyous into my life. And a lot of what Keren's really been sharing with us here is, and I'm going to put it in my terms, Keren, and forgive me if it's not correct for you, and you can certainly correct it. I think you can be happy, surface, or you can be joyous. If you're happy, you wear the mask of happiness that says, I bought this. Look at me, I'm happy. I'm walking around with these bags. Look at me, I'm happy. I've had a facelift, I've had a boob lift, I've had a whatever it is, and I'm happy. Versus, I wake up in joy. There's something within me to serve today. There's something within me to share today. There's something within me to give today. And I'm excited about doing it. And as a result, I can look out on a shitty rainy day and go, that's just the weather, and can find that something to give in the face of feeling like I have nothing left. Now, by the way, I will put a little proviso in there. If you're feeling like that, you're allowed to feel shitty. Shitty's good. Sit in that for a while. Just don't commit to it, but sit in there long enough to feel it and recognize that it's not a permanent state and that there is a way out. And yes, you can have a place of gratitude. If you walk a couple of miles from me, you can see a lot of homeless people and you can go, I'm not there. So how can I serve these people? And you suddenly realize you are blessed, but blessed is not, I'm blessed, #blessed, but it's actually a deep caring. Keren, if you were to leave us with one real punch them in the nose practicality, here's what you need to go do to actually implement what it is we've been talking about, what would be that guidance?
Well, one of my favorite exercises, and by the way, I completely agree with you, There's type 1 happy, there's type 2 happy, and type 1 is garbage. It's like type 1 diabetes. You can't do much about it. There's an exercise I love to open with, and I want to recommend that everybody take the time to do it. And that's to map out all the areas, the dominant or important areas of your life, and write out what would it take for you to be fully satisfied, fully joyful in them. In relationship, in finances, in career, in emotional overall health, in physical health. And if you can actually just start to write that out and map it out, you'll start to see that there are deltas there. And then you'll also begin to see where the cracks are. This is a very useful practice because, as Dov said, I'll definitely regress the moment a trigger hits us. Most people, by the way, Dov, they diagnose themselves as abundance thinkers.
Yeah.
Perhaps you found this as well, but they're like, yes, I'm definitely an abundance thinker. And I'm sitting there going, you just yelled about your tax bill, so I'm pretty sure you're not. When you start to map this out, you can also see where your real triggers are and where your work might be very easily directed, or what you might want to focus on in order to start this work. It'll take a lot of honesty, but if you can just take the time to write out this exercise and map out each dimension of your life and what it would look like, what it looks like now versus what it would look like if you were truly happy, truly joyful, truly finding meaning within it, you will start to see where the work should be pointed.
Thank you for that. That's great. Now, as a final question, I know that you and I are very focused on meaning and purpose. What is the origin story of what gives your life meaning?
I think I realized that I had completely neglected my preferences most of my life because I was only looking for preferences that would make money. I'm a child of immigrants. I was taught that there are really only 3 acceptable professions and that I will find purpose through them. And by the way, one of them, of course, was married to a rich guy. None of the professions worked for me. Once I started to ask myself what I truly love and why I truly love it, I got to a purpose statement. And it really comes down to teaching, learning and teaching. These are the 2 things I love more than anything in the world. And they're the big red thread throughout all of my life. And I discovered them through confronting myself as a human rather than as a resume. And when I started mapping out the dimensions of my life, I started to see that it was devoid of meaning because I was thinking constantly of myself as an Instagram highlight reel or a resume rather than as who Keren is.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Really appreciate it. So before we close up, and I really do want to thank you for being with us, would you please tell everybody where they can find out more about you? I know you've got a new book coming out and how they can find out about that and all your social media and however they can reach out to you and all the wonderful resources.
Thank you, Dov. It's KerenEldad.com. That is our main website. You'll also be seeing the book page pop up at the end of 2024. It's called The Overachievement Paradox, Rising Above the Trappings of Success and Into a Life of Joy and Meaning. I'm very excited to share that the next season of my podcast, Coached, will launch soon. And Dov, I will beg and plead for you to join me. And of course, our Instagram is @CoachKeren with 2 E's. So those are the best ways to stay in touch with us.
And we'll certainly make sure that all that is posted into the show notes. Again, thank you so much, Keren. It was great to have you with us. I hope you'll stay with us to the end. And for you, dear listener, remember that those who control the meaning for the tribe also control the movement of that tribe. And leaders who are committed to positively shaping the political and business landscape know that they must tap into what drives human beings, and that is the emotional source code and the anatomy of meaning. I am Dov Baron. I show businesses, teams, and leaders how to harness their emotional source code to move their tribe, because unified, actualized meaning is the single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for all individuals and companies. Remember, we need your help in staying relevant, so please do whatever you do, go to wherever you go to listen to the podcast, and do us a favor, rate, review, and of course, subscribe to the show. It's a big thank you to you for being one of our regular listeners, if that's who you are, and thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about this journey that is your journey, that is your heroic journey into examining the truth that you may have hidden away from yourself, that sometimes things look good, but aren't that good, and it's not compared to anybody else. It's not about comparing yourself to anybody else. It's about comparing yourself to the level of joy, meaning, and purpose in your life. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deepest meaning to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.